My daughter-in-law told the wedding planner to seat me by the kitchen doors, next to the folding tables where the staff ate their dinner break. And when I asked my son about it, he told me, "Dad, please, just this once, don't make this about you." I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I picked up my water glass, walked to that folding table by the kitchen, and sat down alone in my one good suit. The next morning, my son called me, and his voice was shaking in a way I had not heard since he was 9 years old and broke his arm falling out of the hayloft. "Dad," he said, "the bank is asking questions about the loan. They need your signature by Friday or we lose everything." I stood on my porch, looked out over the fields I had worked since before he was born, and I told him 5 words he will spend the rest of his life trying to forget. I already sold the farm. Before I tell you exactly how a quiet old farmer brought down an entire family of pretenders, tell me where you're watching from tonight, son or daughter, mother or father. I want to know who's sitting with me for this one. And if you have ever swallowed your pride at your own family's table, hit that like button and subscribe, because this story is for you. My name is Walter Higgins, and I am 68 years old. For 43 years, I worked the same 400 acres outside Millers Creek, Nebraska, growing corn and soybeans the way my father taught me and his father taught him. I buried my wife, Eleanor, on that land 11 years ago, under the cottonwood tree she planted the year we got married, and I never once thought about selling a single acre of it, not until the week of my son's wedding when everything changed. My son's name is Bradley. He is 31 years old, and he is, in most ways, a good man, or at least he was raised to be one. He left for college in Lincoln when he was 18, studied finance, and never came home except for Christmas and the occasional Sunday when his car needed something fixed that only I knew how to fix for free. I never held that against him. Every father wants his son to have a bigger life than the one he had. I just did not expect the bigger life to come with a woman who looked at me the way you look at something you scraped off your boot. Her name was Vanessa Whitmore, and she came from money the way some people come from small towns, which is to say, it was simply the water she swam in, and she did not know any other kind existed. Her father owned 3 car dealerships across 2 counties and a lake house that could have swallowed my entire farmhouse twice over. When Bradley brought her home the first time, 2 years ago, she stood in my kitchen in shoes that cost more than my tractor payment and asked me, with a small, polite smile that never touched her eyes, whether I had ever considered modernizing the property. I told her the property modernized me plenty. "Thank you." And she laughed like I had told a very clever joke, though I had not been joking at all. I should have seen it coming, the way you see a storm building on the western horizon long before the first drop falls. Vanessa did not want a farmer for a father-in-law. She wanted a story she could tell at the country club, something about her husband's humble beginnings, delivered with just enough distance to make it charming instead of embarrassing. I was useful to her only as a chapter in a narrative, not as a man she had to actually sit next to at dinner. The wedding was held at the Cedar Brook Manor, an old estate-turned-event venue about 45 minutes outside Omaha, the kind of place with a circular gravel driveway and a fountain out front that never seemed to turn off. Vanessa's family had spared no expense. There were ice sculptures shaped like swans. There was a live orchestra instead of a DJ. There was a raw bar with oysters flown in from somewhere on the coast, though I never did find out which coast because I did not get close enough to ask. I arrived early, the way I always do, wearing the navy suit I had bought for Eleanor's funeral and worn only twice since, once for my own mother's service and once, now, for my son's wedding. I had gotten a haircut in town. I had polished my church shoes the night before at my kitchen table, the way Eleanor used to remind me to do before any occasion that mattered. I wanted to look like a man who belonged in the room, even though some small, honest part of me already knew I did not to the people who mattered to Vanessa. The wedding coordinator, a thin, nervous young woman with a headset and a clipboard, found me in the lobby about 20 minutes before the ceremony and told me there had been a small change to the seating arrangement. She led me not to the family section near the front, where I had been told for months I would be seated, but through a side hallway, past the kitchen, to a small round table tucked against the service doors, the kind of table restaurants reserve for parties who have complained about something. 2 folding chairs sat empty at it. There was no place card, only a hastily printed sticky note with my name misspelled, Walter. I stood there a moment holding my church shoes still, feeling something cold settle low in my chest, the kind of cold that has nothing to do with weather. I asked the coordinator if there had been some mistake. She looked genuinely sorry, more sorry than anyone in that entire wedding party would look at me all day, and she said quietly that the change had come directly from the bride, through her mother, About an hour earlier. I asked her why. She said she did not know, only that she had been told the family section needed the space for close friends of the Whitmores. I found Bradley in a side room, adjusting his cufflinks in front of a gilded mirror, looking every bit the successful young man Vanessa had built him into. I asked him, quietly, whether he knew I had been moved. His face did the thing it always did when he was choosing comfort over courage, a kind of practiced blankness he'd worn since he was a teenager avoiding chores. He said the seating was tight, that Vanessa's mother had a lot of important guests to accommodate, that it did not mean anything, and then, when I pressed him, he finally looked at me and said, "Dad, please, just this once, don't make this about you. I want you to understand something about me, because it matters for everything that comes after. I am not a man who explodes." Eleanor used to say I had a slow fuse and a long memory, and both of those things were about to become very important to my son, though neither of us knew it yet. Standing in that gilded little room with the orchestra tuning up down the hall, I did not argue with him. I did not remind him of the 16 years I spent coaching his baseball team for free because the town league could not afford a paid coach. I did not mention the 3 times I remortgaged pieces of the farm to cover his college tuition after his scholarship fell through sophomore year, or the fact that Vanessa's family, for all their oyster bars and ice swans, had never once offered to help with a single one of those bills. I simply nodded, walked back down that hallway past the kitchen doors, past the clattering trays and the sweating line cooks, and sat down alone at the little round table with the misspelled sticky note. I sat through the ceremony from the back, straining to see my own son get married over the heads of catering staff coming and going with trays of champagne. I clapped when everyone else clapped. I stood when everyone else stood. And when the reception began and the toast started, I listened to Vanessa's father stand up and talk for nearly 10 minutes about the family my daughter is marrying into, and he never once said my name. Not once, though he found time to mention 3 different business associates by name and thank them for coming. Around 9 o'clock, after the cake had been cut and the dance floor had filled, Vanessa's mother, a sharp-featured woman named Diane who smelled permanently of expensive perfume and disapproval, came to my little table with a glass of wine in her hand and a look on her face I recognized instantly, because I had seen that same look on plenty of buyers over the years who thought they were dealing with a man too simple to know his own land's worth. "Walter," she said, though we had met exactly twice before this, "I do hope you understand. This is a very important night for Vanessa, for our whole family, really. We just felt it would be easier for everyone if you were somewhere a little more comfortable. You know how these formal things can be. Not everyone is used to this kind of setting." I looked at her for a long moment. I thought about telling her exactly what I thought of her comfortable little table by the kitchen doors. Instead, I said, "You're right, Diane. Not everyone is used to this kind of setting," and I let her walk away thinking she had won something. I left before the send-off, before the sparklers in the getaway car, because I did not think I could stand there and watch strangers cheer for my son's happiness while I stood in the parking lot like an afterthought. I drove the hour and a half home in silence, no radio, just the sound of my own tires on the dark highway. And when I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the truck for a long while before I could make myself go inside. I did not sleep much that night. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Eleanor and I raised our son, where I taught him to do algebra homework and where, 20 years earlier, I had signed the papers making this farm officially mine after my own father passed. I thought about the folding chair. I thought about, "Don't make this about you." And somewhere around 3 in the morning, sitting alone in that kitchen with a cup of coffee gone cold, I made a decision that would take the rest of the week to fully carry out. Here is something Bradley did not know, something almost nobody outside my lawyer and my accountant knew. 3 years earlier, a energy company had approached me about the mineral and wind rights beneath and above my 400 acres. Miller's Creek sits on a ridge that catches wind almost every day of the year, and there had been quiet interest from developers for nearly a decade. I had turned down every offer that came across my table, because the land was not just dirt and crop yield to me, it was Eleanor's cottonwood tree. It was 43 years of my own sweat, and I was not ready to let it go for money I did not need. But that week, sitting at my kitchen table with the memory of that folding chair still fresh and raw, I picked up the phone and called the number I had kept in my desk drawer for 3 years. The developer, a straightforward man named Curtis Boone, remembered me immediately, and when I told him I was finally ready to talk, he had a team out to the farm within 4 days. I want to be clear about something, because I do not want you thinking this was about cruelty. This was never about hurting my son for the sake of hurting him. This was about a truth I had been avoiding for years, which is that the farm, the loans I had co-signed, the safety net I had quietly built underneath Bradley's entire adult life without him even realizing it, all of it had made it very easy for him to treat me as something permanent and unshakable, a resource rather than a father. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for a person who has never learned to stand on his own is to remove the ground they have been standing on. The wedding had been on a Saturday. By the following Thursday, I had signed a preliminary agreement with Curtis Boone's company for the wind and mineral rights, a deal that would eventually be worth more than $3 million over the life of the lease, with an immediate upfront payment large enough to make my accountant call me twice just to confirm the number was correct. But more importantly, buried in the fine print that mattered most to me, the deal required me to formally release and restructure two outstanding loans that Bradley did not know I had co-signed years earlier, loans tied directly to a downtown Omaha condominium and a consulting business. Vanessa's father had helped set Bradley up in the last year, a business that, as it turned out, was hemorrhaging money and staying afloat only because of a line of credit backed by my farm as collateral. Bradley had never told me the full truth about that business. I had signed the original guarantee 18 months earlier because he'd asked me to, quietly, over the phone, framing it as just a formality, Dad, a bank thing. It'll never actually get called. I had trusted him. I had trusted my son the way you trust the boy you raised, even after he'd grown into a man who could seat me by the kitchen at his own wedding. The Friday morning after the wedding, 6 days after I sat alone with a misspelled sticky note, Bradley called me in a panic. His voice cracked the way it used to when he was a boy who'd broken something valuable and didn't know how to tell me. He said the bank had frozen the line of credit on the consulting business without warning. He said his business partner was threatening to walk. He said, and this was the part that told me everything I needed to know about where his priorities still lived, that Vanessa was already talking about what people would think if the business failed just 1 week after the wedding. Dad, he said, the bank is asking questions about the loan. They need your signature by Friday or we lose everything. Can you just call them? Can you just tell them it's fine? It's all still good? I stood on my porch that morning with my coffee going cold in my hand, looking out over fields that in a matter of weeks would have wind turbine survey stakes driven into them, fields that had just become worth more money than my son could imagine. And I told him the truth. I already sold the farm, Bradley, or I'm in the process of it. The collateral you used my name for doesn't exist the way it used to. I restructured everything this week. Your loan isn't backed by anything of mine anymore. There was a silence on the other end of that call, so complete I could hear his breathing change, could hear the exact moment panic turned into something closer to grief. You did what? He said. Dad, why would you do that? Why now? And I said the only thing that felt honest enough to say. Because a week ago you sat me by the kitchen door at your own wedding, son, and when I asked you about it, you told me not to make it about me. So I stopped making anything about me. I stopped making the farm about you too. He tried everything over the following days. He called 11 times in one afternoon. He drove out to the farm unannounced on a Tuesday, standing in my driveway in a suit that no longer looked quite as sharp as it had at Cedarbrook Manor, begging me to reconsider, telling me the business would collapse, that he and Vanessa would lose the condo, that everyone would know, that he could not survive the embarrassment of failing this publicly in front of people who mattered. I let him talk. I stood on my porch and let my grown son unravel in front of me. And somewhere in the middle of it, I finally understood something I had not let myself see clearly before. He was not afraid of losing me. He was afraid of losing the version of himself that Vanessa's world had convinced him to become, the version with the downtown condo and the consulting title and the wife who came from money. And that version of himself, I realized, standing there watching him fall apart on my porch steps, had never once made room for a farmer father in a Navy suit. I'm not going to bail out a business I didn't even know the truth about, I told him. I'm not going to keep signing my name to things while you sit me by the kitchen. You wanted this life, son. You wanted her family's approval more than you wanted mine at your own wedding. So now you get to find out what that life costs when there's no farm standing quietly behind you holding it up. Vanessa called me exactly once, 4 days after Bradley's visit, and her voice had none of the polished sweetness I remembered from my kitchen 2 years earlier. She was cold, direct, almost businesslike, the way people get when charm has stopped working and they've moved on to demands. She told me the loan situation was affecting appearances with her family, that her father was asking questions about Bradley's finances, that people in her circle were starting to whisper, she asked, without a shred of self-awareness. Whether there was any way I could help smooth things over for the family's sake. I thought about the folding chair. I thought about the misspelled sticky note. I thought about Diane telling me, over a glass of wine, that some people were not used to that kind of setting. Vanessa, I said, I hope your family enjoys whatever setting they're used to now. I won't be joining you in it. Within 3 weeks, the consulting business Bradley's father-in-law had helped him launch folded entirely, unable to survive the frozen credit line and mounting private debts that came due all at once. The downtown condo, which I later learned had also been financed in part against assumptions of family money that no longer materialized on my end, went back to the bank within 2 months. Bradley and Vanessa moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the far side of Omaha, a place, I am told, with a parking lot instead of a fountain out front. I did not celebrate any of it. I want you to know that. There is no part of a father that takes joy in watching his son's life come apart, even when that son has hurt him. But I also did not reach for the phone to fix it, not this time, because for the first time in Bradley's adult life, there was nothing standing quietly behind him to catch the fall. And I had come to believe, sitting alone at that little round table with the kitchen doors swinging behind me, that this was the only lesson left that might actually reach him. It took nearly 5 months before Bradley showed up at my farm again. And when he did, he came alone, in an older car, wearing clothes that looked like they'd been chosen for comfort rather than appearances for the first time since I could remember. He found me out by the fence line, checking on the survey stakes the wind company had left, and he stood there a long while before he spoke. I've been thinking about that folding chair every single day, he finally said. I keep trying to figure out why I didn't just walk out with you. Why I let her mother talk to you like that. Why I told you not to make it about you, when it should have been about you. You're my father. I did not say anything right away. 43 years of farming teaches you that some things need to sit before they're ready, whether it's soil or grief, or a son finally telling you something true. I'm not going to pretend the last 5 months didn't happen, I told him eventually. I'm not going to hand the farm back the way it was, and I'm not going to pretend I trust you the way I used to, not yet. But you drove out here alone, in a car that isn't trying to impress anybody, and you said something true instead of something comfortable. That's a start, son. That's more than I got at your wedding. We are still rebuilding, Bradley and I, slowly, the way you rebuild anything that's been neglected for a long time, one honest conversation at a time. Vanessa and I have not spoken since that phone call, and I understand from Bradley that things between the two of them have grown strained in ways that have nothing to do with money and everything to do with what that money revealed about each of them. I do not know how that part of the story ends. I am not sure it is mine to know. What I do know is this. I still wake up every morning on the same 400 acres, though a good portion of it now hums quietly with wind turbines that pay me more in a single quarter than I used to earn in 3 years of corn. I still sit at the same kitchen table where I raised my son, and some mornings I still feel the cold of that folding chair settle in my chest when I think about it, though it bothers me less now than it used to. The lesson I would leave you with, if you have sat this long with an old farmer's story, is not that money is the answer to disrespect. Because it is not really. The real lesson is that the people who love you are not the ones who need you to disappear quietly by the kitchen doors so they can be comfortable in front of strangers. And sometimes the most loving thing a father can do, even when it breaks his own heart to do it, is stop holding up a life that was never built to include him in the first place, and wait patiently for the people in it to find their own way back to the table. What would you have done, sitting alone at that little round table? I'd like to hear it from you, whoever you are, wherever tonight finds you.